Hey there, and welcome to Work Dope, a podcast on the messiness and the potential of humans at work. I'm Linda Stacy, and I'm a corporate sellout who likes to think of herself as a corporate innovator, and I think that working in corporate America doesn't have to suck. Admittedly, it often does. By some statistics, up to 80% of the workforce are unsatisfied, dissatisfied with their place in the workforce. And on the flip side, the paradox here is that folks are expecting more and more for work to create meaning and purpose in their lives. The pandemic and the great resignation, and now the great regret and quiet quitting, all of this has forced us to take a look at quality of life and what culture really means for people inside of organizations. In fact, I think business is really cool. I think that building things and solving real world problems and creating, these are all fundamentals to the best part of the human experience. This is how we embrace human potential. In this episode, I'm chatting with Colleen Hauk, the CEO and founder of The Corporate Refinery. Colleen is an executive coach and the co-author of 2 books, including the bestseller, Women Who Ignite. She is a multiple-time contributor to Forbes. She's delivered her keynotes and trainings to Fortune 500 companies and organizations such as Dell, Merck, Panasonic, and New York Life. And her LinkedIn learning course, Improving Your Leadership Communication, has 60,000 learners. In the episode, Colleen gives a ton of value, insight, and perspective. Colleen shares her own story of burnout and tips for navigating around burnout. She vulnerably shares a story of a bullying boss. And what is heroic here is that she stayed the course and saw it through, where so many choose to leave. And this takes courage. She felt a deep responsibility to see it through. We talk about the question of value. Colleen shares how her definition of what it means to be valued in the workplace has changed over the years. We talk about humanity in the workplace, and we talk about awareness. So many tips in here. I hope you enjoy the episode. Colleen, thrilled to have you on Work Dope today. How are you?
I'm fantastic, Linda. Thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah, it's great. Great to be in touch. I like to start every session off hearing from you about your career history. Maybe adding to that right at the start, if you could tell us what you tell people you do now if you were at a cocktail party.
Wonderful. Yes, absolutely. So I'm the founder and CEO of a company called The Corporate Refinery. Our tagline is that we forge new paradigms for women in leadership. And what that means is we are on a mission to keep those executive women in their career. We call it the and life, being able to have a powerful career and extraordinary personal life. So whether that's through mitigating burnout or being able to accelerate their quest for leadership, as well as then on that leadership topic, we go in and we love working with high potential emerging leaders to really make sure that we aren't getting into the old school habits of leadership. Even for some established leaders, being able to break some of those habits. And it began for me, really began because my mom was a working mom. I grew up wanting to be just like her. So I wanted to make sure that I was a wife, a mom, a career woman. And that's the journey that I started out on. And unfortunately, going into 2013, I accepted a promotion, quite frankly, with blinders on. I didn't realize how it was going to take me down this path, legitimately working so much that I was only sleeping about 4 or 5 hours every night. I had 3 kids at home. I was an awful wife and mom, to the point where I still tell my husband, Matt, I don't understand how you didn't pack up our kids and leave me during that time. 13 months into it, I thought my only option was to quit my job. Fortunately, I didn't. I hired a coach. I figured things out. Ironically, ended up getting promoted at that same company, and I stayed there for 4 more years, which eventually then I transitioned out of my 15 years of corporate into developing my own company, The Corporate Refinery. And as I'm sure we'll talk about through the podcast today, I won't share as much just yet, because like I said, I'll share it later. But I also had an opportunity to see what happens when you have a lack of self-care, as well as when poor leaders are put into place, and how that creates a toxic culture for everyone.
Yeah, I'm struck by the fact that you hired a coach and then were promoted. It's like, clean some things up, probably accelerated a little bit more, and then it gave you another opportunity, and you did that on your own without having been having it funded, I'm assuming, by your employer. That was something you did yourself.
Correct.
And it speaks to other things we're going to talk about, just in terms of my concern that often the most money is funneled into executive leadership training and this big gap that exists. And I think you shared with me on another call how it's a 9-year gap between promotion and actual skills being provided.
Correct. A Harvard Business Review did a study to find that it was the average age that you receive training versus the average age that you're first promoted into management is a 9-year gap. And technically, if you think about it, it's more than a 9-year gap, because HR leaders say that they want people to have leadership skills in order to even be promoted to the first level of leadership. Yet we're waiting until, not on average, 9 years after they're promoted to even provide that training. So yes, I had to take some things into my own hands.
I want to ask now, what are those things that they're actually looking for? What is someone who's not yet promoted, who knows how and why they have these skills naturally? I believe that we can learn them. Perhaps they were modeled for them by circumstances, their family, their environment. But are there a couple, 2, 3 key things that are recognizable traits in potential leaders?
Yes. So you're exactly right that there are some people who are born with some natural tendencies toward leadership. But the fascinating thing is that our brain is malleable. We can be learning all of the time. The number one thing I would say that HR leaders, and or just if you take a look at the research based upon who those high performers are, and typically high performers are moved into leadership roles, 90% of them are high in emotional intelligence. So we're talking about those soft skills, right? What is our self-awareness, our self-management, our ability to manage relationships with others? Those are the types of skills outside of, are you an amazing individual contributor? You've got to be an amazing individual contributor to even be remotely considered for promotion, much less being promoted into leadership. That's got to be there. So once we put that aside, then what are those additional indicators? And I would say emotional intelligence, any of those kind of soft skills, and all. This is the funny thing, because everybody will say, oh, well, what about communication? What about empathy? All of that's tied to emotional intelligence. If you have the emotional intelligence, it's impacting all of those other soft skills. So that's where it starts.
Absolutely. The individual contributor, you have to be able to do your job well. And sometimes things are getting in the way of that. All sorts of things could be getting in the way of your ability to do your job well. And one of those things could be, you have a poor boss, a boss that is getting in the way of your ability to really perform. And I'm just going to jump right in. You have a story about a bullying boss situation. I had a bullying boss situation early in my career. So I'm always eager to hear people who are willing to share, give some perspective now that time has gone by and you presumably know more things than you did at the beginning. So lessons from that, and whatever you are open and free to share about the experience, I'd love to hear.
Yes, I'm very open to sharing it. What's interesting, Linda, is that I didn't know it was a bullying boss at the time. It actually took me nearly 3 years after the situation was resolved for me to understand it was a bullying situation. And unfortunately, also took me 8 months at that job, at that company, to even get the situation resolved. Unfortunately, one day I came into the office and noticed that my boss was not talking to me. I mean, legitimately was saying hi to everyone else, didn't say hi to me. Later that week, we were in an office-wide meeting. He ignored a contribution I made, but acknowledged a peer of mine. And then at the end of that week, he had emailed for both my direct report and myself to come into his office. Well, I was wrapping up a call, so my direct report got in there a couple minutes before me. And as I entered into his office, I stood in the doorway for roughly 15 minutes while he just had eye contact and conversation with my direct report and didn't acknowledge that I was standing there, which then triggered that the following week for me to have a meeting and just say, hey, look, we've had over 5 years of a wonderful working relationship. I've noticed that the behavior has changed. Could you tell me about it? And he, quite frankly, just blew me off. He acted like he wasn't doing anything, nothing was wrong, that he was focused on the organizational goals. And basically, like, I'm imagining this, you just need to get over it. But the situation continued to get worse. Typically in corporate, you have a designated HR person. I tried twice to get my HR rep to acknowledge what I was saying. We were in a remote office, so we didn't have anybody there on site to witness what was happening. And fast forward, this started in October, fast forward to May, Mother's Day, that week leading up to it. Everything kind of just happened all at once, where he openly disrespected me in front of our entire team at a team meeting. That Sunday on Mother's Day, he emailed every mom on our team wishing them a happy Mother's Day, except for me. And then we were all together for our national sales conference for 4 days, where he ignored me. And on the final day, he assembled everyone on our team except for me, and he positioned everyone seated at a table where it was directly in my line of sight, where I was already sitting. I finally went above and beyond to the VP of HR, who then bounced me to my boss's boss, who told me a similar response. I'm not there. I don't see it. This is hearsay. To which I responded and said, I have 30 pages of documentation. I'd be happy to send that over. He then bounced me back finally to the VP of HR. And basically within a few weeks, that VP of HR flew to our across the street to our hotel across from our corporate office and began to interview several employees from our office, not just on our team. And what was uncovered was a consistent pattern of bullying that had been going on for his entire 15-year tenure at our company. We don't get access to all of the decision. He was not removed from our company, but he was removed from his leadership position and was no longer allowed to work within our offices. So I thought I had really strong coping mechanisms and survival skills and strategies that I kept trying to implement. I mean, this is 8 months that I was going through being ignored by my boss, being treated as if I didn't exist, and feeling every day that my job was in jeopardy. I had been there for, at that time, over 10 years. I was primary breadwinner, if not almost sole breadwinner in our family. So I had a lot on the line with this.
Right.
And unfortunately, everything that I knew how to deal with what had traditionally been thrown to me as obstacles, I didn't. I had to seek out therapy and alternative means to get through those months. What I will say is that what kept me going is that roughly 2 weeks after this started happening to me, I had 4 to 6 other individuals, 4 who were still with the company, and 2, so it was 6, 2 had left the company, who very quickly let me know that this had happened to them in the past, if not ongoing. And I just said, there's no way I can leave. I have to be the person who's going to get this resolved. Whatever that, I didn't have an end goal. I wasn't trying to get somebody fired. I just knew this can't, if I'm aware of this, I can't leave in good consciousness without making sure this is resolved.
Yeah, no, there's so much in this. And I just applaud you for staying in it, the tenacity. So many people would just say, get out. And I understand that. And I would get that, but it doesn't change. And this has parallels to the Me Too movement. I don't really want to compare apples to apples, but there is, I believe, a need and a reason to talk about things that aren't always talked about in corporate. And when you escape or you leave, then the behavior continues, things don't change. I'd like to think that things are changed going forward, that maybe there are some generational things here, but I also believe that some of these characteristics continue to manifest in different ways. So you speak about this topic now. That is one of the things that you speak about, right? You share the story. And I'm curious about what you're aware of in terms of what's still happening. I have to think that people approach you with their story. What's your understanding of what continues to happen in the workplace?
Yes, yes. So when I'm running, whether it's a talk, speaking at a talk, or running a workshop, at what we call it at the corporate refinery, the 5-star leader. And I open with this story. The primary reason I share this story are two reasons. One is just to openly let people know that my journey hasn't been picture perfect. I've unfortunately had to endure some things, which it's all relative to everybody's experiences, but also that we have to overcome this, right? This is still happening. I will say that I don't necessarily always hear the same story about bullying, but what I do hear is that this is why I say forging new paradigms.
Mm-hmm.
I do continue to see that how your experience was with a leader, often those practices, those habits get picked up. And so when we still have, again, I call it an old school leader, right? This kind of old school leader, sticks and carrots. You're just a number at my company. You're here to drive revenue. I need butts and seats, like this old school thought of leadership. When we still have that generation in the workplace and then they have direct reports, it's not necessarily to the fault of that next line of leaders for picking up those habits. That may be all that they know. Those are the
Yeah.
skills that they're picking up.
Right.
And so with the work that we do is, one, we try to, on the offense, make sure that nobody starts off in leadership with that, with those high potential and emerging leaders. But we really go in to say, hey, it's okay. It's okay if this is how you learned it. I mean, the essence of the corporate refinery is
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
we have some amazing leaders in the workplace who have just picked up some really bad habits,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't necessarily know that they could be have such a greater impact as a leader for their company and for their team if they
Mm-hmm.
were to just make some fine-tune adjustments, just to
Mm-hmm.
refine pieces of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be the smallest of things that make the greatest of
Hmm.
impact.
Hmm. So you described this bullying boss, not to like to stay with
That's
that for too long, but he stayed at the company, but he was no longer in a leadership position. Sounds like someone who may not have been open to someone like you or your firm had come into that company back then. Sometimes people aren't even open to the education that's provided. Do you think there was any change on that individual's part? And at the end of the day, how much does it matter? What I think really matters, and what I love that you've demonstrated, is that you used your voice. You did have a number of tactics to get clarity. A lot of people may not have even approached him the way that you did, much less document and then talk to the right people in the lines of command, if you will.
Absolutely. I mean, I know that for certain because there were two people very quickly who I knew had left the company, and they heard what I was going through and they let me know that was the reason they left. And the only time they said anything was on their exit interview.
Mm-hmm.
So it was shared. HR at some level did know that this was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't speak for the reasons why nothing had happened in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I did have a variety of tactics. For me, it was, I just felt a level of responsibility. I wasn't necessarily at a VP level, but I was a senior leader. And I was also looked at within our office of roughly 30 people as a role model in our office, especially as a female leader in our office. And again, I just felt a level of responsibility that I'd been there for over a decade. I cared about these people, not just my direct reports, but I cared about everybody else that was in the office. And we had seen a decline in the culture in our office, primarily driven by this particular leader. My husband, I will tell you, my husband, Matt, was like, oh my gosh, this is insane. Just quit. Because he was so worried about my own health and well-being. I understood why he was telling me to do that. But I just said, look, I'm going to go find a new strategy on how to take care of my health and well-being as much as possible, because I do need to put myself first. I couldn't fight that battle if I wasn't at some level of health, right? Of mental health. So I invested my own time, money, and energy into that. But I just said, who am I as a leader if I just back out and I leave these people with this situation that is just, it will continue. Yeah.
You say you just felt responsible. And going back to what I was asking you about before, in terms of qualities of leadership, that is a fundamental one. Whether or not you are in a leadership position, are you willing to take something as far as you can? I even see it day to day as a consumer in customer relations. Is that customer service rep willing to take this as far as they can? How much responsibility do they feel? There's so much in that, because some of it we bring because of how we were brought up. And if it's not demonstrated to you inside of the organization, it can be difficult to then extend it to the organization's customers. So burnout is a big topic for you. And you've already shared that, you sought your own coaching and resources to overcome burnout and stay in it and do well within the
Yes.
corporate environment. And if you had to narrow down, you've already said the most fundamental, that if we can't take care of ourselves, which we hear a lot. I mean, that at this point, most people in corporate, women especially, are hearing it. And then I hear them say, how do you do that? How do you carve out the time? And I get that you just have to, but I think they still like tactics for how do you ensure, and then fill in the blank with whatever those very key things are that you're doing for yourself.
Yes. So I'm going to talk about three things here, Linda, because I get approached by executive women, whether it's at the end of a conference when I'm delivering a keynote, or even through the peer group that I run, or my executive coaching clients. Is they often start off saying, like, Colleen, help me. Maybe I just need a better time management system. And I cringe. I'm like, no, you do not need better time management. So the first thing that I would offer is the basics of communication. So we're often under assumption that your manager has any clue what your workload is. And Gallup has identified the top 5 reasons of why people are suffering from burnout. And most of it has to do with overload of work, unreasonable time pressures, lack of communication from managers. So don't assume that your manager, when they say, hey, can you take this on? Or, hey, I'm giving you this, they don't remember the 50 other things that you're working on. So number one, you have to be able to communicate with your manager. Don't assume that they know, and don't assume that they're just trying to pile on. Your manager has their own responsibilities to be thinking of. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is, and it's so interesting because we're seeing right now this whole thing about quiet quitting. So one of the discoveries that's come out is this concept of non-promotable tasks. We call them NPTs. This is, by the way, different than office housework. Office housework is a component, can be a type of NPT, but office housework doesn't cover all of the NPTs. And what this means is that there are certain tasks that every employee does that is not contributing to the organization's mission or bottom line revenue profit, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're things that need to kind of be done within an organization. Well, for women specifically, I will say that the research has found that managers are 50% more likely to ask a woman to take on a non-promotable task. And when asked, women are 50% more likely to say yes. So we're digging ourselves into this situation where, I mean, imagine this, right? You need to do certain things to get promoted. Right? You have certain tasks, certain projects. There's these things you need to do, but then you've got all of these non-promotable tasks on your plate. So what do? You work more hours, and that contributes to burnout. So no time management process or system is going to get you out of that. What we need to start looking at is evaluating, what kind of tasks am I doing? Which ones are promotable? Which ones are non-promotable? And how do you start to either say no, delegate, shift more of those non-promotable tasks off of your plate, so it either gives you more time back for your personal life, or it gives you more time back to focus on the promotable tasks. And that is a really key piece that we're recently finding is hitting hard. And so this whole concept of quiet quitting is directly correlated to that. It's not about, I'm only going to work 9 to 5, and at 5 o'clock, I slam my laptop down and stop working. Let's get out of that mentality. Most people are salaried workers. We know we've got to work hard. Just analyze where you need to be working hard. You need to work hard on high profile assignments. So I'll give an example. When I was vying for a promotion that I did not get until after 3 years, I reflected back recently and I saw, well, wait a minute, I was raising my hand for all of these things. My manager at the time would ask me to volunteer on the board of a company sponsored women's group. I said, yes. Oh, can you train our new hires in the sales department? Yes. Could you co-create a lunch and learn for our office meeting? Yes. Guess what? None of those were highly visible. Nobody other than my boss, who didn't have as much weight to get me promoted as other people did. When I flipped that, it was, hey, I'm taking another VP out to lunch so I could share what I was doing. Oh, I want to volunteer on our president's committee. Highly visible, right? Oh, I'm not going to do an office lunch and learn. I'm actually going to do a presentation at our company's national sales conference where our CEO is present. So it's about shifting what it is we're using our time on, I would say is one of the key foundations there. And then if I can throw the third one,
go for it.
Really simple. I always think back, I was, in elementary school in the 80s, and I always remember this KISS, keep it simple, stupid.
Sure.
We'll just say, keep it stupidly simple. I see so many people trying to be like, I need an entire sabbatical. Women will tell me like, oh, I found this 24 karat gold face mask. Okay. None of this stuff is going to actually cure your burnout. You know what you need? You need 7 hours of sleep on a consistent basis. You need to drink more water. You need to stand up and move for 30 seconds in between your virtual meetings. Like, keep it stupidly simple. And when you do those kinds of things consistently over time, that's going to help you recharge, feel better mentally, physically, emotionally than all of these a month sabbatical necessarily.
Those are fantastic. I love the reflection around non-promotable tasks. I've been very interested lately in digging more into boss as a mentor or a coach instead of the more traditional hierarchy, the older ways that you've already referred to a little bit. And what does that look like? How is that relationship between the direct report and the boss forged? And how does that coaching relationship, how does it get started and how does it continue?
So I am absolutely in alignment with you, Linda, that leaders or managers need to be acting more as coaches, right? A coach does two things really well. One is that they are there to support and develop the individual direct report, but they also understand the organizational's objectives. And so they align the two. They say, how do I have my direct report? How do I coach them, train them, develop them so that we can all as one unit reach our organizational objectives? And what are my organizational objectives? And how do I take those and attach them to what matters about the employee? We see that coaches are the most effective. I mean, there's tons of research behind that. The data proves this. It's challenging if you are a direct report and your leader isn't a coach. You can ask for certain things. I am a belief that we all are in control of our own growth, development, future in general. So as a direct report, if you don't have a coach as a manager, you could be asking for things like, hey, I would like to meet every week to talk about the specific agenda. And one of the key points would be on your development areas. One of the key points would be on your well-being, opportunities for growth. But I'm a trainer and coach at heart. It's what I've been even prior to my corporate life. But we know that people do better when they are not the sticks and carrots strategy. There's something that I often train through our 5-star leadership program is we want to inspire frequently and motivate occasionally. I saw this too often. Majority of my corporate background was in sales, right? And so you got to have these contests and you've got to push everybody. And oftentimes I would see that these contests, these ways to quote unquote motivate people would oftentimes backfire because it's not actually tuning in to the inner desire, the intrinsic piece for the individual. And when instead, as a leader, we can inspire our team, when we can get them attached to the greater cause, then we actually give them freedom. We actually allow them to approach things in a different way. And in turn, that ends up driving greater results. So leaders need to be coaches, but they often, again, I'm going to say they weren't necessarily raised in the corporate environment that way. They weren't exposed to that 10, 15 years ago. So they don't know how to do it themselves.
So I know some ways that this manifests itself: a vacuum, a lack of communication, a lack of frequent touch points. And so it's just assumed that people are doing their jobs. And then review time might be the only time that anything is actually addressed.
One of the key strategies, if I only have an hour to talk about the 5-star leader, the third thing that I offer is that you need to lead with intention. I was just with a group of leaders, and they have been at their organization for 5-10 years. They've been amazing individual contributors, but they're just now becoming formal people leaders, first time having direct reports. And we're walking them through this process of how to have these conversations with their direct reports and how it should be done intentionally and consistently. And time again, I'll have a leader say, "Oh yeah, when I have, I've got my check-ins." And that's not good enough. Check-ins, these, first of all, they're informal and they tend to be driven toward the work itself, not the individual. And so as leaders, it is not good enough to have these progress reports, these status updates, these check-ins. You have to have an intentional, on the calendar, reoccurring meeting, whether that's weekly, bi-weekly, month, whatever that cadence looks most appropriate for that individual. But you need to have an intentional time where you are asking about them. How are they feeling personally? How are they feeling professionally? Where do they need help? What does the future look like? What motivates you? What's important to you? A lot of times leaders are like, "Oh yeah, I talk to my employees about that." And it's, "Oh yeah, during once a year, during annual performance review, or, passing in the hallway or in between virtual meetings." And it's like, if it's not intentional, that employee doesn't know that it's important to you. They think it's not important to you. And when they believe that their leader, their manager doesn't care about their growth and development, and one of the ways it's shown is when they don't have intentional conversations about it. When they believe they're not cared about for their future, they don't stay. They start looking elsewhere.
And or people can become less engaged. They lean in less.
Absolutely.
And I do think that in any organization, there's variability here, that there's a percentage of people that are not that invested. And maybe this hints back towards the quiet quitting a little bit. I think it's possible to have a boss that isn't that invested. And so you've given some ideas for ways to maybe get a little bit more out of them. But I do think that this is an area of challenge. And depending on your role, you might not feel like you have as many options. Some people will say, find another job in this situation too. But I don't think that should always be the knee jerk. Let's see what's happening here and if there's anything else that can grow from here. But we have to take full responsibility for our own actions. And I have found in my own work life experience that the more that I am who I want to be, the more I respect others the way I want to be respected, the more that I engage, the better relationships I have with people, the more I get out of a boss or a manager or something like that. So there is always the opportunity for imbalance here with people being invested or not.
Well, and Linda, I would say, so I often, when I'm in a workshop, when I'm training, and I'll have a participant say, "Colleen, I love this 6-step process you shared with us on how to have these weekly meetings with my direct reports. How do I get my boss to be more of a coach?" Right? So what we were talking about. And I tell them, just blame me. Go back and say, "Hey, I heard this process. Would you be okay if I brought this to our meetings and you lead it?" So Linda, your listeners here, like, use your podcast as an excuse. Hey, Mr. So-and-so, I was listening to this podcast and I think this would be a really useful agenda for our meetings, or a reason for us to meet. And I don't want to say spin it that it's just because then it would help your boss and help the team and the organization. You're not spinning it. It is true.
Yes.
Hey, I'm bringing this to you because I think it would be really helpful to ease you, Mr. Boss, on what you have to think about. And then it'll help my development, which will help us reach our team goals and our organization's goals, right?
Yeah.
Use the podcast.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Use it as an excuse. Anytime too, when you're trying to sell something up, using the word pilot, or let's test this out. Can we try this for 4 to 6 months? I think that helps a leader ease into the idea, because you're saying right at the beginning, we're going to evaluate this. We're going to see how this goes. We're looking for improvement. So that's fantastic. I love that.
Love that idea. Pilot. Let's just test this out together.
Are there other characteristics that if bosses or leaders, managers are listening to this podcast, like things to check in about, to ask yourself in terms of the way that you're approaching? Because some folks, they may even want more self-awareness, but maybe they don't have the time to ever sit and reflect. But what are a couple of questions that they could be asking themselves as they think about the kind of boss they are?
So awareness, like you said, is the first. It's actually the first critical strategy that I talk to leaders that you need to have is awareness. And it is because, and it's to no fault of the person, but you are promoted because you are an amazing individual contributor. And so now you're moving into this people manager role. And it's very clunky because how you know you've been acknowledged, recognized, promoted is based upon your individual contributor skill set. And now we're asking you to shift and not be thinking about yourself as often and be thinking about other people. So there is this level, number one, of awareness of I'm no longer just an individual contributor, like just coming to terms with that you're showing up and your primary responsibility is for your direct reports. And so then coupled with that is that awareness, the self-awareness, which is the emotional intelligence we talked about earlier. And you mentioned, Linda, about like, if I don't have time, I got to tell you, it really doesn't take that much time. You don't need to formally journal if that doesn't work for you. But look, every time you come out of a situation where you had a heightened emotion, whether that was frustration, anger, sadness, happiness, even, right? You can be too optimistic, quite frankly, especially as a leader. But anytime you come out of a situation and you say, gosh, I had this heightened emotion, take literally like 90 seconds. I mean, this is what I just always remind people. It doesn't take that much time. Take 90 seconds, be 90 seconds late for your next meeting or your next call. Nobody's going to notice if you're 90 seconds late. Take 90 seconds and just say, who was in the room? What was the conversation? Was I tired? Was I before I came in? What had happened just before I came in? How was I feeling? And just start to do that after every time and be aware of how you're feeling. If you just do that one thing, just take a little bit of time to reflect when you come out of heightened emotional situations, you're going to be that much better of a leader in terms of awareness. The second thing I would offer is that we lose touch with humanity. And that's the second critical strategy, is that we've got to lead with humanity. This whole, it's business, leave your emotions at the door. That is BS. That is complete BS, because human beings are hardwired for emotions. We cannot leave emotions out of the door. So you as a leader, acknowledging that your employees are not just a number, that they are a human being who walks in with their own experiences, thoughts, and feelings every single day. I'm not saying you need to become best friends with them. I'm not saying you need to dive into all of their personal life, but knowing that this person literally is a human being. They are not a machine producing a result. They are a human being. And the quicker that especially newly promoted leaders can acknowledge that, the more that, again, your direct report says, oh, my boss, my manager knows I'm a person, right? Like they care about me to at least the like basic fundamental level of humanity.
Yeah. And your second point is related to your first point. If the boss is to reflect on their own emotional reaction, understand that your direct reports have emotional reactions too. And that has been such a journey for me that I've talked about on this podcast, and how it's a constant evolution. We never arrive, right? But I remember earlier in my career knowing that something had just happened, but having no sense of what am I reacting to? And then I eventually got to a point where it's like, I need to calmly kind of sit and figure this out. Something got triggered and I am off. And this happens to the boss. This happens to the direct reports. It's constantly happening in these environments.
And I get it, because, the word vulnerability has been used a lot, and I'm happy it has been. And so people struggle with that. Like, what level, how much am I supposed to treat people as a human being? How vulnerable should I be? And I know I was exposed in my first kind of semi-corporate job. I had gone from being an elementary school teacher straight out of college. I was 21 years old. I spent 6 years in the public school system, very, very different environment. And so, at the age of 27, 28 years old, I land my first kind of corporate job, and I'm wearing a suit to work every day. And I remember my manager calls me into the boardroom, and I'm a 27-year-old excited gal in their suit. I'm so like, oh, this is an official meeting in the boardroom. And And just a few minutes into it, my manager is crying. She's
Oh, wow.
hysterically crying,
Wow.
telling me all how frustrated she is with our
Mm,
office and the
mm,
job and how
mm.
she's hoping I can come in and help her. And
Right.
I was so shocked. So that degree is
Mhm.
not what we are asking for. That's
Yep.
not what we're looking for.
Right.
But just allowing people to know, hey, it's okay. I mean, look, people come into situations, they're going through divorce, they
Right.
have a family member who has cancer. Think
Mhm.
about life that happens outside of the
Yep.
walls of the office.
I don't know if this is true, but I've thought about it a lot, that perhaps people think that if there's too much emotion, maybe the work won't get done, or that they're not going to know how to relate to someone too. I think that we need to realize that people can be human and we can treat them as humans, and that work will still get done, and it will actually get done better in the long run if people can bring their whole selves to work. Because if we're feeling blocked or that we can't be our whole selves, I think that's gets in the way of good work as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, as leaders, you're asking for your team to not just be there 40 hours a week and we spend more time at work, right? You're asking for your employees to invest emotionally in a way into work, right?
Yeah,
Hard
absolutely.
work, that's an emotional
Yes.
investment. Do you know our company's mission and vision? Do you
Yeah.
know the company's purpose? Like, you're already asking your
Right.
employees to be emotionally invested in some
Right.
way into the work. So it's like
Hmm.
counterintuitive then that you're not acknowledging that they are a
Right.
human being. The more that we can support that and really like grow that, the more they become invested. And I'm not asking for people, I don't train for managers to go to the extreme and become best friends with everyone. Look, it's not about being liked or being friends, it's about being effective.
Mm.
And to be an effective leader, it's to treat people as human beings
Hmm.
and to help develop and show them where their future is. The research is there. You
Hmm.
and I, Linda, we've experienced it ourselves
Right.
on both ends, right? We've seen both
Right.
sides.
Right. Yeah. And you're reminding me that the components of Gallup's study on engagement, that's the bottom line definition. How emotionally and psychologically invested are your people in their work? So, one question that I like to ask all of my guests is around being valued in the workplace. It's a topic I hear people talk about all the time. I just want to know that I'm valued. And part of me feels that it's really important to understand what that looks like, and that it can be different for everyone. And so
Mhm.
I'm curious to know what it's meant for you in your career, and how you've felt valued when you were in more traditional corporate. And now, as you serve your corporate clients, how do you feel valued in your work?
Yes, yes. I loved this question, and I'm so glad you sent it to me ahead of time because it
Sure.
was one I wanted to reflect on. And for me, being valued is in some form of recognition. And for me, that goes back all through my childhood, that work hard, you'll get rewarded, right? Like some sort of recognition. My parents never actually said that to me. I don't remember them saying that, but it was like both of them were whispering this in my ear, right? So some sort of reward or recognition, or for me, the reward was the recognition. But Linda, I love that you asked the question, has it changed over time? And, you really provoked me to think about how important that is, because for me personally, it did change over time. Over my 15 years in corporate, as I thought about it, it did change. And I appreciate this question. I hope your listeners think about this for themselves, because that made me think, gosh, I should have paid more attention to that as a leader, to know if I had a direct report for more than a couple of years, which most of my direct reports were with me for several years, was I checking in to see how
Hmm.
they felt valued? Did it
Hmm.
change? I
Hmm.
believe I did, because I had intentional, consistent meetings
Hmm.
with them, but this was
Hmm.
great. So for me, at the beginning, when I first started an official professional career, it was just thank you, like a simple thank you, not saying that that doesn't still feel good, but a simple thank you was all it took. And then as I started to get into this, like I'm climbing the corporate ladder, my husband used to call me the machine. Like I was just all about work, right? What meant most to me was promotions. Like promotions were literally my
Hmm.
love language, if you will, at that
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
Then it turned into, okay, well, I don't necessarily want any more promotions, but I want public recognition from senior leadership. Like I
Hmm.
wanted our
Hmm.
president, our CEO
Hmm.
to maybe not even public acknowledge, but I wanted that recognition from senior
Hmm.
leadership.
Hmm.
And then finally, in my last evolution, my last year or so before I left corporate, it was about seeing my direct reports get promoted. That for me was value when I knew, hey, I'm coaching them and I'm supporting them. And then they're committed to the company and they're being their best selves and they're getting the acknowledgement now into promotion.
Right.
That felt good for me. So,
right. It's an evolution for sure. And I think that it takes some work experience to have that evolve and change over time. You experience things and you change your tack, your direction, and what's meaningful to you over time. And we can't assume that your boss knows what that is.
One of the things that I asked my direct reports in the very first time that they started reporting to me, whether they were new to the company or just new to my team, I would always ask them, like, what motivates you? What gets you excited? What drives you? And similar in this question. And, I led salespeople. So you would, in general, right? A stereotype would be, oh, salespeople are motivated by money. What's most value to them is money. And it was interesting because of my 4 direct reports that at this one particular moment in time that I can remember that were they had quota, they were salespeople. Of those 4, one, it was very clear. She said, oh, money. Like, I want as much money as possible. I want the biggest commission. I want bonuses. Another one of my direct reports, it was all about flexibility. That's all she wanted. Another direct report wanted to have high visible assignments. He loved being on anything that was like from corporate, from our headquarters. And another person, she wanted recognition, public recognition from somebody other than me, her manager. Okay. She wanted it from above. So it's important to be asking those questions.
Yeah. And I love that you are presenting as you are open to any of those. You are going to help align that person's things that drive them with the organizational goals. And there's no judgment on your side. I think sometimes I pick up on that from bosses. So that if the values aren't in alignment, there could be funny judgment, or the boss might be more willing to help or promote or steer the person who has values that align a little bit more directly.
Yeah, I could see that. But here's what I'm thinking, Linda. I'm like, it's actually easier when you have people who have different motivators or what they value. Because look, the reality is there's only so many promotions that you as a leader can allocate in one particular year or point in time. So it's great that, oh, wonderful. So-and-so wants to be on a committee. Great. Like, now I don't have to worry that promotion is top of mind for all of my direct reports, right? I think it actually makes the life easier for the leader to have that variability, and not everybody's necessarily vying for the same thing. And I also think it's important as a leader to ask questions in a way to really uncover the true underlying motivation behind things such as, I want to be promoted. I had a situation where a particular employee had been working at our company for a few years. She was moved over to reporting into me. And in our first meeting, she told me, I have wanted to get promoted to senior director. I have not been promoted, and I want you to be the manager who's going to get me promoted. Well, that's a lot of lot of pressure right there, right? But when I asked her, well, tell me more about why you want to be promoted to senior director, I was able to uncover that it actually was a bunch of things that I could get her without her actually being promoted to that role. And so having those intentional conversations and asking, tell me more. Why is this? Describe this. Where oftentimes, to your point, Linda, the employee may not even realize it for themselves. But as a leader, we can ask the questions to help them become aware of it.
Yeah. It's fantastic. Fantastic. I've enjoyed this so much. Okay. How can people connect with you, Colleen?
Yes. LinkedIn is a great place to connect, but you can go to thecorporaterefinery.com. I also there, you can sign up to receive weekly leadership videos. So they go straight to your inbox. We cover pretty much every topic, Linda, that we just talked about today. Shows up in some shape or form in a video. There are 2 to 4 minute videos just to give leaders and employees alike encouragement, tips, and just ways to show up and be their 5-star selves.
That's fantastic. Okay. Thank you so much for the rich conversation, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Linda.
All right. Bye. There you have it. Episode 16 is in the books. I wanted to repeat some key things that came up in the conversation with Colleen. One is just, again, around the bravery and the courageous attitude that Colleen had towards the bullying behavior in her environment and the willingness to stick it out. I'm so conflicted about this sometimes. When is it the right time to leave because you are at risk of harming yourself? But, when is it time to actually stay so that things change? If people are constantly leaving, then potentially the bad behavior can continue. Also, I thought the point around it taking 9 years to get leadership training once a person is promoted was really interesting. And of course, paired with the idea that leaders or HR people or whomever is looking to promote, they're looking for people who are showing leadership qualities. So it's the chicken and the egg here. I mean, yeah, I guess there are a lot of people who might come into the workforce with some of these leadership qualities, but as I take it, self-leadership and all of these concepts, anything that we hear or read about as it relates to what the leader should be doing, I really feel that anyone in the organization could be doing to up-level their own positioning, to make themselves more available and apt to be the one to be promoted. But even if you're not interested in being promoted, you'll probably have a better quality of life at work if you are taking ownership and responsibility for the things that you're needing to own and be responsible for. I thought too that it was a good point to bring up that we pick up habits from our leaders, and often we don't know any better. We can have amazing leaders who have just picked up bad habits. Colleen also shared some keys to overcoming burnout. One was don't assume that your boss knows your workload. Another one was avoiding those non-promotable tasks, especially the completely non-visible ones. I think especially early in one's career, you can lean into something that could get you visibility that your regular job might not. So who knows if that's a promotable or not. I think it's important to be cross-advertising yourself, if you will, making sure that a lot of people in the organization know the value that you bring just because of because they have more chances to interact with you because of other things you might be doing for the group. The third point was really taking care of your body, yourself, being sure that you are getting enough sleep, that you're drinking water, that you're moving your body, just back to those basics, and that you're making those adjustments to your daily life and that you're not expecting to take a sabbatical or have some kind of major life move and enable you to be able to take care of yourself physically. She also mentioned how regular one-on-ones are critical. This has come up several times on this podcast. And if you are not getting regular one-on-ones with your boss, ask for them. You set it up. It's absolutely going to help you have a better experience of your work life. We also talked about the question around value and how it changed a lot for Colleen over the years. That first it was about recognition, and then it was about promotion, and then getting recognition at a higher level from senior leadership, and then seeing her direct reports being promoted. Colleen also brought up this good point that as a boss, get clear on what your direct reports value. Ask them key questions, follow up with once they do tell you what their values are or what they hope to do. Ask them why, try to get clear on their motivation. And if you're a direct report and your boss isn't asking you these things, what would you do if your boss did? What if you got a new boss tomorrow and they asked you these questions? Would you be able to answer it? Consider that. That could help you just decide who you want to be tomorrow at work if you know what's important to you in terms of your values and what is motivating you in that direction. As always, I hope you're doing well in your work and in your life. If you would like to send me any comments, reactions, questions to anything I've talked about on the podcast, please do. You can either email a written response or you can record a message on some kind of recording app on your phone and attach it to an email and send it to linda@workdopepod.com. That's linda@workdopepod.com. Until next time, I hope you have a fantastic week. Bye-bye.